Ladies and gentlemen, Open Finance pioneers, hello, hello, and a very warm welcome. Thank you for joining us for our Open Finance Appathon API deep dive with the team from YTS. Now, I'm going to talk to you a little around our Open Finance Appathon, and then I'm going to hand over to Leon, the CTO of YTS, and his team, Ruben and Pim, and they're going to talk around their APIs, their rich functionality, and how easy it is to connect with them. The Open Finance Appathon is a competition that is supported even by AWS and Mastercard. Now, at OBE, we believe that innovation drives collaboration. So we've brought together 3 of the best API providers in the industry. The aim of this competition is to inspire, first and foremost, is to inspire scale-ups and startups to develop market-ready product. And it's actually supporting our industry growth from open banking through to open finance, and then eventually we'll get to open data. Now, we're looking for you to put on your thinking hats, okay, and to solve problems that will make a real difference, and to work with your developers, people from UX, and your teams from product to think about a problem. So we'd like you to think through a problem and be excited about solving all of it or part of it so that you can make better products for the customers. It's always got to be about the use case. We've 4 challenge statements, which you can see on our website and you can also see on LinkedIn. Now they are open finance for good. Please be inspired. Retail and SME banking, corporate banking, and payments. Okay, so we've 12 amazing judges and we've selected them from across the industry. We've got leaders and innovators, and they tell me that they're looking for innovation that's well executed. Now we're excited, and I am genuinely excited to see the products that our talented industry will produce. So now let's just touch a little on the prizes. AWS are going to give $5,000, that's USD, of AWS credits to all 12 finalists. And YTS very generously are giving free API consumption for 6 months, capped at 5,000 GDP, UK pounds. And that again is to all 12 finalists. Now, I would just like to return, if I could, to one of the challenge statements, and that is to payments. 2 things I'd like to say here. First of all, down the side of your screen, you can see how to get onto the YTS Sandbox, but you'll also see a GIF that you can click on and you'll be able to download the YTS white paper. I would really recommend that you do that, and whenever you do your reading and you're catching up, that is well worth looking through. And what you can actually see at the bottom of your screen is a QR code. We believe that open banking payments should be ubiquitous. So you can lift your phone during this session, you can raise your phone, and you can, through open banking payments, make a charity donation to one of our charities. Now, also on your screen, you'll see the very talented Karina, who is graphically recording the very generous information that the team from YTS are about to share. And finally, as always, you've got Slido, so you can shape this conversation. And all I would ask is don't be shy, please ask the questions of the team here today. So without further ado, it's my absolute pleasure to hand over to Leon, who will introduce his team and talk through their presentation. So Leon, it's all yours. Thank you very, very much.
Yes, thanks, Helen. And also, we're very happy to be here and to be a part of this Appathon, to indeed see what use cases can be driven from open banking and open finance. And that personally excites me as well a lot. I've been involved in PSD2 and open banking from 2016, and now we're finally getting to the stage where we see the real big momentum shift use cases hopefully coming about, and who knows if they are among the applicants. So today, what we would like to share with the viewers is what YTS, Yolt Technology Services, is all about. What can we deliver? I will take care of that part of the presentation. Then Ruben van Loen, who is technical product owner of our core platform team, will run people through the capabilities of the API, how it's set up, and also show a live demo of our sandbox environment. And then finally, Pim Gaemers, who's also a product owner, technical product owner of the clients team, who owns the developer portal, for example, will explain what a developer needs to get started with our API. So hopefully that gives all the information. If there's any question, as Helen mentioned, add them to the Slido. I will look down to my second screen every now and then to see if there's a question there. But as Helen said, don't be shy. If you are, feel free to reach out later. But I hope that our API, our open banking API, can deliver and inspire a lot of use cases, but we also try to show you a bit what we do with it and how it could be used as examples. So first, a bit on us, Yolt Technology Services. So we are one of the leading players in the open banking space. We've recently reached the milestone of over 1 billion API calls in the open banking ecosystem. So we were the first third-party provider, TPP, to be live with an open banking API back in January 2018. And we were always on a mission to bring these APIs to the Yolt app customers as quickly as we could. And from there, we gained the knowledge, expertise, know-how, we built the system, and that's why we are now also delivering this as a service to other businesses who want to leverage the power of open banking for their business, but don't want to necessarily connect to all the individual banks themselves. And our platform, as you can see, we do around 25, 26 million API calls per week. It's very robust and can support you in that journey. And we look at this, as I mentioned, from a platform perspective, where the goal of Yolt as a group is to reach as many people across Europe as possible with the power of open banking. And then it can be either via them downloading our Yolt app, which is a leading money management app in the UK, but also live in Italy and France. And on the other hand, if they don't download the app, but they actually rather use their existing finance manager or bank, then we also want to power those businesses with API connectivity, so that either way, our platform can help consumers and businesses across Europe to be smarter with their money. And if you look across Europe, then you see that it's a very mixed landscape. As Europe is Europe, sometimes negotiated deals actually don't happen, or there's a lot of compromises. And you see in this space that a lot of countries and banks within countries have chosen different routes towards the API exposing. And you see that in Czech Republic and Poland, they have their complete own specification. In the UK, we obviously have open banking specification. And in France, there's STAT, Germany, and then banks within countries have also chosen different APIs. And it's our goal to connect as many of these banks as possible to reach European coverage. And as you can see in the table, we already in the UK, we cover 95% or over 95% of the market. And we keep expanding that coverage across Europe. And it is also because of this that there's actually a need for an aggregator or a platform like YTS. Because of all these different sockets that the bank essentially provide, all these different APIs, because it's unfortunately never plug and play. Even if a bank is following open banking specification, there's always little changes, permutations per bank, which require it to be a bespoke connection. And that's why we merge all those different sockets to one API socket on our platform. So making the analogy to the travel adapter that we all used to carry around when we were traveling around Europe. Well, we are essentially making a digital travel adapter for you. And we offer services on top of that API, obviously. And there is two main services that came about with the introduction of open banking and PSD2. On the first hand, it's account information services. So the ability to pull in or share, allow a customer to share their transaction and balance history on the account and some account information. Secondly, there's payment initiation services where customers can initiate a payment from a third-party platform. So essentially, for example, from the Yolt app, we instruct Barclays to send money to an HSBC account. And finally, there's value-added services that we put on top of these basic PSD2 APIs, such as data enrichment and KYC services, for example. Some detail on that is that if you look at the data enrichment side, there we offer things like categorization of transactions. So categorizing the transactions in different spend buckets like groceries, eating out, coffee, you name it. We have merchant recognition models in place, which based on the description of a transaction recognizes which merchant it is. So if it says Starbucks in the description, we recognize that it's Starbucks. The reason why we have to do it that way with kind of a text reading model is that a lot of banks don't actually provide, for example, the MCC, the merchant category code. So therefore, there's no clear-cut way to get the merchant or the merchant name rather than data mining it from the transaction description. And finally, we look at payment cycles. So we see recurring transaction patterns on the account and therefore can tell a user what payments are coming up, but also what has happened historically. And that can really help consumers manage their money better. On the KYC side, we've developed some models around customer verification, where we can do name checking, leveraging a data science model which checks the name of the user or business against the name that we get back on the account. There's name screening and there's customer activity monitoring. So all necessary because bear in mind, PSD2 and open banking are financially regulated activities which also need to adhere to anti-money laundering legislation. And therefore, customer activity monitoring, especially with the new FinCEN files, is a very important factor in this space as well. And we can take that pain away from our clients. Then what are the benefits of open banking? So there are some use cases which we hope can trigger some thoughts for the applicants who are hopefully looking to use the YTS API. So first of all, it's a multi-bank overview. So simple use case where you can allow users to aggregate multiple accounts from different banks or financial providers into one view. This can be credit cards, can be current accounts, and some savings accounts. Because bear in mind, the scope of open banking is payment accounts. So any account which is payment enabled. Secondly, it can be used for account verification. So does the person own a certain account that they say they own? And we can check that in two ways. On the one hand, check the name that the user provided against the name on the account. But secondly, if a user is able to give consent to share the data, they need to have the login credentials. They need to be able to log into that account to share the consent, to give consent. And that's two ways that you can never be 100% sure, but can be almost sure that that person owns that particular account. And it can be very handy in onboarding journeys, for example. Then lending is a big use case where, especially nowadays in these unprecedented times, 3-year history of transactions doesn't say much about my current credit worthiness as a business or as an individual. So looking at timely and accurate data helps lenders to make proper decisions and help businesses survive in these unprecedented times. E-commerce payments, where payments can be a real driver of open banking take-up, because currently credit cards is, especially online credit and debit cards, are the main payment vehicle, especially in the UK and some other countries across Europe. And typically there's a percentage of the value is charged as a fee. With BIS, the money is taken directly from the bank account, so with instant payments shows up on the account of the seller immediately, and it's typically a flat fee. So it can be a real cost-saving exercise. This is also something which we saw in our white paper research that we commissioned, that a lot of businesses indicated that next to looking to recover from the crisis in 2020, their second highest priority was to cut transaction cost. And with the move online, everything happening online, selling online, you can see why. And I think payments can be a great use case in this. And then finally, bill collection, which is a combination of account information services. So knowing when is the best time to collect a bill from a customer and potentially using a PIS push as a payment method rather than a direct debit, which can be returned by the user whenever they want. So some use cases, But obviously, the big thing is what is your winning idea for an Appathon use case? And I'm positive, as Helen also mentioned, that there's a lot of industry ideas out there, and I really hope to see them come up through this Appathon. Then I'd like to hand it over to Ruben, our technical product owner, who will tell you a bit about how our API works and the platform, and eventually he will do a demo at which we will quickly switch screen sharing, so he will take over the screen from them. Thanks a lot, and I'll get back to you at the end of the presentation. Ruben.
Yes, okay, thank you, Leon. Next slide, please. Yes. So as Leon already mentioned, there's a lot of variation across Europe in specifications and the APIs that banks expose. There's just so many differences that it takes a lot of time. It's very labor intensive to connect all these APIs. Leon already mentioned it, but you have Berlin specification, for example, and it's not that we can create one Berlin connector and connect a lot of banks. In reality, we see that we have to actually do a lot of work per bank because it's never the same. And differences can be everywhere. It can be in signing, TLS, the fields that are or are not supported, but also entire flows that are different. So single, multiple redirect flows. So we created an API and an intermediate system, so an aggregation hub, in fact, that can actually deal with all these variations, and that can provides a very easy interface for clients to connect to, and that connects then to all the banks. So that's basically what you're seeing here. YTS being in the middle, offering AIS and PIS services to clients and end users, of course. Next slide, please. So how our API works is hard to put in a single slide, but here's a schematic view, sequence diagram of how it works. There is a much more detailed diagram in our documentation. We have a lot of different scenarios completely drawn out on the Sandbox documentation, but I'll quickly run through this. As you can see, YTS is in the middle between the bank and the YTS client. And what we are essentially is an intermediate in an OAuth flow, because most of the banks, they provide a redirect scenario. Actually, under PSD2, you are allowed to provide multiple ways of connecting, but basically every bank provides the redirect flow, and the redirect flow means they implement an OAuth to code ground flow. So I'll quickly step through the steps that are part of this flow. So first, the client gets a list of banks from us, from YTS, from which the end user can make a selection. So for user then selects his bank. Then the client gets a login URL for that bank that is in OAuth, is called the authentication URL. For some banks, we need to set up a session in order to be able to do this, because the banks generate these URLs on the fly, but that doesn't go for all banks, so that's optional on the right. Then in step 2, we return this URL to the client. Client redirects the end user to the bank. So then you go to what is called the resource server in OAuth 2, which is in this case the bank. And on the bank, the end user is requested to log in and to provide consent. And logging in can mean, usually means providing credentials and also a second factor, for example, code or some image to scan, something like that. So when the user logs in at the bank, he then provides consent for, basically saying, yes, I want to share my data with YTS or with the client. And then the user is redirected back by the bank to a pre-configured URL that Pim will tell you a little bit more about later. This URL can be configured in our developer portal. So the user goes back to the client. The client can then continue the journey in the front end, saying something like, welcome back, dear end user. Hold on while we get your data. And in the background, the client, I think there's an arrow missing here, but the client posts the full redirect URL that the user lands on back to Yolt, because that redirect URL, it contains the code from the OAuth code ground flow. and Yolt exchanges that code in step 5 for an actual access token. So that is a long-lived token that is usually valid for 90 days. And Yolt can use this token to access the user's account and transaction data. Then when Yolt initiates data fetching, so it obtains the data from the bank, and then Yolt will asynchronously inform the client that the data is there. So it uses a HTTP webhook in step 6, and also that webhook is configured in our dev portal, and Pim will show you how that can be done later. And the webhook being sent is a trigger for the client to actually start fetching the data from Yolt. So Yolt acts as an intermediary. It also saves the data, and you actually get the data from Yolt. And then in step 7, the client can do whatever is needed to satisfy the remainder of the use case. For personal financial management, for example, client would show the accounts and transactions in a mobile app, for example. But for credit scoring, the data may be offloaded to a credit scoring data science pipeline. Could be a lot of use cases, of course. So that is in a nutshell how the AIS flow works. Then this is the BIS flow. It's similar in the sense that it is also an OAuth flow, and Yolt is also acting as an intermediary in this OAuth flow. But the individual steps are a bit different, of course, because client needs to submit a payment. So I'll run through this quickly. The demo that I'm going to do in a few minutes is focused on AIS. BIS starts the same as AIS. There's a list of banks also on the left-hand side. User can select a bank to make a payment from. Then a form should be presented by the front end, so the user can fill out his payment details. And then the payment is sent to YTS by the client, and then YTS forwards that payment to the bank. And then YTS will return an authorization URL, same as AIS basically. The authorization URL is used by the client again to redirect the end user to the bank. And then at the bank, the user authenticates again, so he logs in. And then instead of for AIS, he consents now to the payment. In AIS, you consent to, do you want to share this data with the client, your account and transaction data in this case. The payment will be shown on the screen, and the end user will agree to making the payment. When that's done, the user is redirected back, and then it depends a little bit on the bank's implementation, but then Yolt expects the client to submit the whole redirect URL again back to Yolt, because for some banks we need to actually get the token, and we can only execute the payment after this second step, but that depends on the bank. But the flow is similar for all banks, or actually completely the same for all banks. You get the login URL, you submit the payment, you redirect the user, and then you come back, you submit the redirect back URL back to Yolt, and then the payment is done. So the interface is the same for all banks. That concludes payments. Then some more about the developer portal. We have a portal that shows you we have written documentation that shows you how to connect from end to end. So we have a getting started guide that is very useful for this, because when you connect to YTS API, you will need to do a few things on the security front. For example, you need to provide us with a public key that is associated to a private key that you use to sign messages when you get the token. You will have to provide us with a TLS client certificate that we will whitelist on our end. This is all automated. You can do it through our developer portal after signing in. Pim will tell you more about that in a minute. And I do have some links for you that I can maybe post later with articles that would be interesting to read if you're going to connect to our API. Most of all, the getting started guide, but there is also a more detailed AIS sequence diagram for you to actually see in detail how the sequence works. And then, of course, there's the Swagger documentation that shows you all the endpoints that you see a picture of here with sample requests and responses. Next slide, please. And when you connect to us on the Sandbox, you will be using the Yolt test bank. It's a virtual bank that we built specifically to allow you to build a full rich use case without actually having to connect to a real bank. Because what we're seeing is that the sandboxes of actual banks, they're not as rich as our own implementation of a bank. And on the Sandbox, you're not able to connect to production APIs yet, which has to do with AEDAS certificates. We didn't dive into that in this presentation, but you need additional certificates to be able to connect to production banks. So this bank, Yolt Test Bank, allows you to actually fully develop your use case against our mock data. It supports a lot of nice scenarios, such as default happy scenario, but also unhappy scenarios like Yolt is unable to get a token, Yolt is unable to get data, and it has several users with a lot of transactions, medium transactions, or just a low number of transactions. So you have some variation and some testing opportunities there. And it also supports more exotic flows like double redirect that we're seeing in with some banks. So that's the Sandbox. Pim will show you more about that in a minute. Right now I will start the demo. So let's indeed share my screen. So this is our YTS demo app. It is we use it internally to test features and to make sure that to look at the fields that we're exposing, to answer questions from clients. Sometimes we demo it at clients, and today we are showing you here how our API works using this this app. A bit of a heads up about how this works. There are several IDs involved in connecting, so I will quickly skip ahead to show you a little bit about the developer portal. That's here. When you connect to the developer portal, there will be you will get a few IDs. For example, a client ID, which is your main identifier for Yolt. You will file a public key that we use to validate your requests when you obtain a token. That has an ID, and we will you will configure a redirect URL that also has an ID. And lastly, there will be a webhook URL that you can configure. And the reason that I'm running this through Ngrok, maybe you know Ngrok, maybe you don't, is that we send you webhooks, of course, and when you're testing locally, your machine is normally in a network which is behind a NAT router, and it's not accessible from the internet. So if I want to receive webhooks, I need to expose my application publicly, so to say, on a public domain, and Ngrok can do that real easily. So if you're connecting to our API, I advise you to use a service like Ngrok so that you can receive our webhooks. So I'll start off by selecting the environment, our Sandbox environment, the version of our API, currently version 1. Then the Sandbox client is basically my way of selecting the client ID that I showed earlier. So that is this ID. I'm telling my app, use this ID, please. And then the redirect URL I'm selecting here is basically saying, please use this redirect URL that I pre-configured before this demo. So first I'm going to create a user, Ruben van Loen. And as I said before, in the Swagger docs, you can see how all these endpoint works, how all these endpoints work. I can see it also here in my development environment. So here I'm posting a user. So then I'm telling Yolt, I want to create a connection. Give me the list of banks, please. So that would translate to a call to V2 sites, which would result in a banks list that's rendered here in our little dropdown, just one bank, Yolt Test Bank. And now I am asking Yolt to connect to this bank. So that's asking, please give me, so that's the connect endpoint. And that is asking, please give me a login URL for this bank. And as you can see in the connect call, I'm mentioning the site ID, that's the site ID of Yolt Bank, and the redirect URL ID here. That's basically telling Yolt, I want to use this redirect URL. So I'm now going to manually redirect to the bank. We don't have the auto redirect feature in our demo app yet, so I'm just going to open this in a new tab. We are now landing on Yolt Test Bank, the consent page. So this is the page we built. This would normally be the bank login page. In every demo, something goes wrong. This is usually a very nicely styled page. I think we lost some CSS here. Doesn't matter, it works. So I'm selecting the light persona. That's our light test user. I'm saying token duration 90 days. Normally it's 90 days, but this will also allow you to test different scenarios where tokens immediately expire. It will allow you to test token expiration flow, for example. And then I'm saying I want single redirect because this is a normal regular bank. So now I'm providing consent, and the bank is going to redirect me back to the redirect URL that I configured, example.com. So this is going to look a bit strange. Normally, you would actually go back to your client domain. So this is going to look a little bit strange, like, hey, he's going to example.com, what is this? But you should imagine that you're now back on your client application, landing and telling the user, welcome back from the bank, thanks for providing consent, and please hold on while we're getting your data. So I will manually input this redirect URL because the client app needs to post the whole redirect URL back to Yolt. And Yolt is now in the background exchanging the code in the URL for an actual access token for Yolt Test Bank. And as you can see, it has now a connected user site. And my app received a webhook through the ngrok domain saying, hey, you were creating a user site. A user site is our term for a connection between a user and a site. A site is a bank. So this is basically a connection. The event is the activity was finished. You are connected. There was no failure. We managed to fetch data just now a few seconds ago. And this is the ID of your newly created user site. So we managed to get data, so I will demonstrate that. This is the user site. We got 3 accounts, and for each a bunch of transactions. These are all in euros, but we also have a UK user if you want to work with pounds. So that concludes the demo. I hope that was useful for you. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. And I will now, Pim will now tell you a little bit more about the developer portal that I already showed you briefly.
Yes, thank you, Ruben. Leon, if you could share the screen again. All right, thank you very much. So like mentioned before, my name is Pim Gaemers. I'm the technical product owner of the YTS Clients team, which means that my team is responsible for, among other things, the developer portal and making sure our clients get a proper connection towards YTS and have a smooth onboarding experience. So yeah, especially in the things we mentioned previously, the brief overview of Leon and the more technical description and the demo of Ruben. We have a lot of we work with a lot of sensitive data, and we take our security very seriously, which is partly, of course, dictated by regulations, but also because security and having data integrity is very important for us. But it does mean that creating a connection towards YTS and also from YTS towards the eventual bank sites is a little bit involved. So as Ruben also mentioned, we require a mutual TLS between the client and YTS. So the client, that would be your app. We have RSA keys for obtaining access tokens. And in the end, you have temporary access tokens, which need to be refreshed periodically. So making these security considerations is indeed, yeah, it makes sure that you have to do something to connect properly. But of course, we also deeply care about a smooth onboarding experience. And even though our sandbox is connected to the Yolt test bank and we are not working with real life bank data, we still have a lot of these security measures in place, which is done so you could have a smooth migration path when you eventually connect to our production environments. So that migration or that go live of your app goes smooth as well. So there are a lot of there's a couple of things that you need to be able to set up your app or your environment to be able to connect to us. So first and foremost, you need a GitHub account, and that's because our developer portal uses GitHub as a authentication server. So you need GitHub to log in to our developer portal. Next, you need OpenSSL or an alternative for generating a CSR and a request token. So in the brief screenshot, screen share Ruben showed, he showed the management portal where yeah, a lot of he showed you the various IDs, the client ID, the ID of the redirect URL. But one of those things was the public key. So you will generate with OpenSSL a request token where you keep your private key to yourself, as you always should. And the public part of your signing key is posted to the dev portal. Next up, that's optional, but very much recommended, curl, which is just a handy utility for quickly discovering our APIs, which could be very beneficial for this for discovering our APIs and just do a quick request to those APIs to see what you get back. This is of course fully optional. The other is utility is the small step CLI. Which is also an optional utility, but I can definitely recommend it. It's a utility for a CLI utility, which allows you to easily create JOT tokens and do part of an OAuth flow. So that definitely, from a developer perspective, would make your life a little bit easier. The same goes that if, yeah, eventually you will start building your app. Yeah, we do a lot of things with JOT tokens. So the request token public key is a JOT. The OAuth tokens are a JOT. So it would definitely be helpful if you would leverage a library for handling those JOTs. And of course, there are many various libraries depending also on the programming language, on the different ecosystem you are building your app with. So we don't favor one particular over another. And lastly, the ngrok or an alternative, so a tunneling service which would allow you to receive webhooks and redirects on your local machine. So that would definitely make development and debugging a little bit easier on your side. So you don't have to yeah, put your app during development on a publicly available domain. So these are the things that you need. So what you would do is the first step, go to the above URL, developer.yolt.com/authentication/register. And there you would be presented with a sign-in page, which allows you to sign in with your GitHub account. And then you are presented with a form. And in that form, you have to provide your credentials, but also the CSR, which you generate, and the request token public key. So once you generate those two items based on OpenSSL, you can fill out your account details, upload your public key and your CSR, and then you can use curl and small step to generate a signed JOT and receive an access token. Now, this is in a very brief nutshell describes the various tools that you need and the various actions you should take. Of course, we also have very much more in-depth written documentation based on our developer portal. So I will now briefly share my screen so we can quickly look over. I hope that, yes. So when we are looking at the developer portal, you could go to the Getting Started page. And in the Getting Started page is pretty much a very detailed description on what you would need to do to get access to our APIs. So this is in much more in-depth written documentation, which provides the actual OpenSSL commands, the actual curl commands on how to connect to our APIs in the sandbox. So this documentation is should be all you need to set up the initial connection towards YTS and get connected to our sandbox environment and get the accounts and transactions from our demo app. Apart from our Getting Started guide, we have various scenarios which are written out, which detail the various scenarios provided by our Yolt test banks. So for example, here you could see a more detailed sequence diagram and the various accompanying webhooks and how exactly our APIs work. So how which APIs you actually need to invoke, what webhook you will receive, and it should be it should be smooth sailing from there, from obtaining the accounts and transactions or initiating payment requests. So yeah, again, if you have any further questions, please let us know, and otherwise, happy connecting and happy Appathon. And Leon, back to you.
Thanks, Pim. So as you can all tell, we were hoping and expecting to get a lot of developers on this call as well, because even my ears still start flapping if I hear ngrok and curl and OpenSSL and all the tools. Just a little inside view into our kitchen. I think the internal record for connecting from start to finish to the sandbox is 5 minutes. So I challenge you to beat that. But in all seriousness, I hope the guys have been able to show you that it's straightforward and easy to connect to the sandbox. And then from there, it's really about your use cases to make use of those APIs to eventually help in one of the 4 challenge categories that Helen mentioned in the beginning. Just to make sure that you're all aware, on the right of your screen, you can see the links to the developer portal and also the link to the white paper. There's no questions still in the Slido, so don't be shy. If you have any questions, now's the time. We are still here. Otherwise, feel free to reach out later as well. And with that, here are some links to additional information, and I'd like to thank you all for your interest in YTS and our API and the Appathon, and back to you, Helen.
Leon, thank you very, very much for giving us a very deep dive. You absolutely nailed it. Thank you. We asked for a deep dive into your API capability and a fascinating look through your developer portal. And as Pim said, it's all plain sailing. And I hope everybody that's been listening does actually take down, you lay down the gauntlet for your challenge, 5 minutes connection. So let's see, you've made it very super simple. So thank you very much. And you beat me to it. I was going to encourage people to have a look at the side of the screen, to go to your Sandbox. And obviously, if you haven't yet done, please do register for the Appathon. And one last shout out for that white paper. I've read it, and my background is payments. I've got payments in my DNA. It really is one of the best white papers I've read in a long time. Okay, so all that remains for me to say is thank you to the YTS team, to Leon, to Pim, and to Ruben. Absolutely fantastic. And also thank you for you to tuning in and to watching. And before we go, I would like you to, we will be putting this content on LinkedIn. I would like you to share it with your teams internally. That's your developer teams, your UX teams, and your product teams, and be inspired to solve some of those problems, and be excited about creating some new user cases from one of the 4 challenge categories that we have. All that remains is to say thank you very much. Good luck. I genuinely can't wait to see the applicants. The best of luck, and be safe. Take care now. Thank you very much. Bye for now.